Have you ever asked yourself what your best images of 2022 are? This year I shot more than 80,000 images, traveled to 9 countries, all by car, and photographed countless genres in photography. From landscapes to weddings, from macro to motorsports, night sky, travel, etc, etc. Here are my 10 best images of 2022 and a bit of info how I shot it and why I used the specific camera settings. Number 10. A fun shoot for a Christmas card. And no, I'm not Australian, we really shot that in summer, which made it even more fun. This is technically the most advanced shot in the top 10 list. Full sun, and as you can see, if you look at the shadows, it is backlit by the sun. Beside that, we had to choose a pretty fast shutter speed in order to freeze the motion due to the bright ambient light. Additionally, the flashes were not supposed to be in the frame, so we had to place them further away from our models. Altogether, that meant that we had to use quite powerful flashes to brighten the shadows of the family. We used one 1200 watt seconds Godox 80-1200 Pro and one 600 watt seconds Godox 8600 Pro, both at full power without diffusion. And as you can see, the family is completely dry from hair to toes. And that means we had exactly one single shot to get it right. One single shot. And this is the one you see. Camera info, Sony a7 IV, Sony 16-35mm f4, 1/1600th of a second to freeze the motion, f5 to not get in trouble with depth of focus in case they wouldn't stay in the same plane, and ISO 200 because the flash power still wasn't enough to light the family. Number 9 of my best images of 2022 is one that I'm particularly proud of. Believe it or not, this is basically straight out of camera. No crop, no added blur, just as is. How did I shoot this? I wanted to get pretty extreme with the motion blur. So despite the speed of the biker, I used a pretty slow shutter speed and I had to use a 600mm lens to make the biker almost fill the frame. And that is something I definitely improved a lot in 2022. Keeping fast moving subjects, being birds in flight or motorbikers, in the frame. That is something you can and have to practice. And you have to do it prior to the shooting you have in mind. So if you go to a bird show, a Formula 1 race or anything similar in 2023, practice before. Don't expect that you will just miraculously be able to keep your subject in the frame. That doesn't work. After quite a bit of practice, I can now easily target my subject with a 600mm lens. Okay, that was a bit braggadocio. To improve my keepers for this shoot, I placed my camera on a tripod and adjusted the pan axis to the direction the driver took, which was slightly downhill. Then I adjusted the ball head to frame the drivers, who of course passed this spot multiple times. That left me with only 1 degree of freedom, so all I had to do was pan along the pan axis roughly at the speed the driver is moving to keep him in the frame. Camera, Sony a7 IV, Sony 200-600mm zoom lens, shutter speed 1/25th of a second to get the motion blur in the background while I panned with the driver and also to get the motion onto the wheels. That, by the way, is one thing that differentiates a beginner from an advanced motorsports photographer. The spinning wheels. f/25 because there was a lot of light, and ISO 100. On to number 8 of my best images of 2022. To you, this image might not mean as much as it does for me, and it's also the second portrait orientation shot. I don't like portrait orientation, particularly not for YouTube videos. Why does it mean so much to me? First, as many of you know, I absolutely love shallow depth of focus. Second, for me, this image stands for the freedom we experience when we are out on the road with our van. We hope to be able to do that much more in 2023, particularly for the new photography course videos. And third, this image shows a bit how much we care for the environment. We do have solar power on the roof of our house, we don't eat meat, and we haven't been traveling by plane for the last 4 years. That doesn't mean we will never fly again, but we have become more conscious in this regard. Either way, having solar power when being out on the road and getting power from the sun is something that makes me feel incredibly free. Thank you, sun, I really appreciate you and the rest of nature. Camera info, Sony a7 IV, Zeiss 35mm f1.4 lens, shutter speed 1/6400th of a second. Not because the water cooker moved, but because I wanted to shoot wide open at f1.4, ISO 100. Number 7. Yes, we also photograph people, and yes, it's again shot wide open. What a surprise. For our people shots, we much prefer genuine expressions and poses. We are not the biggest fans of extremely posed shots anymore. Keeping it real is something I really enjoy. By the way, when talking about we, I mean my wife and me. We're a team and I couldn't have a better partner in the job and in life. That has to be said at the end of the year. And no, she didn't force me to say that. For this shot, we used the diffuser to soften the light of the low sun. It was shot about 60 minutes before golden hour, so the light was still pretty harsh despite the diffuser. I still had an ND filter on. I think it was a 2-stop filter. Camera info: Sony a7 IV, shutter speed 1/2000th of a second, aperture f1.4, wide open on the Sigma 85mm f1.4 art lens that is currently filming this video. ISO 160. Yes, a bit stupid. I forgot to lower the shutter speed after a bit of an action shot with the groom swinging around the bride prior to this image. Always remember, ISO is the game. If you don't need it, don't use it. Number 6 of my best images of 2022 is a shot from Venice, Italy. We actually wanted to go to the Dolomites, but it had -10 degrees centigrade up there, so we decided to first go to Venice and from there into the mountains. Spoiler alert, there are Dolomite photos coming up. If you've ever been to Venice, you know that the only time when you have a bit of peace is early in the morning. So we got up at 5 and ran to one of the bridges to photograph it at sunrise. I wanted to blur the water of the Canale Grande to give me that special soft look. But after the sun has risen, there is so much light that you logically have to use an ND filter, if you expose very long. Camera info: Sony a7 IV, Sony 16-35mm f4, 63 seconds of shutter speed. I have come to love my Sony Bluetooth remote for long exposures, for triggering the video when I'm out alone and stand in front of the camera, for exposure bracketing without touching the camera, and so much more. Couldn't live without it anymore. By the way, a list of the tools I used for my images can be found in the description of this video, including ND filters and other stuff. Okay, so 63 seconds shutter speed, f9 aperture, and ISO 100. On we go to number 5. No, not the Dolomites yet. You have to be a bit more patient. Number 5 is an image we shot for our biggest client to date, Plitvice, a leading law firm in Austria and in Central and Eastern Europe. I don't know how many days we spent with them in the past year. We shot several hundreds of portraits in 8 countries for them in 2022, created videos, advised them when they set up a video room for webinars and podcasts, and so much more. This is our favorite shot from the many shooting sessions we had with them. Give them a shot at wolftheis.com, on YouTube and on Instagram if you want to see more from our work. A huge thanks to them for this awesome year and for being such a great team to cooperate with. Image info: shot with the Sony a7 IV and the Sony 14mm f1.8 lens. I was running backwards in front of them, holding a gimbal with the camera in one hand that helped me keep the horizon level, and in the other hand I held the Bluetooth remote that I mentioned before to release the shutter. Again, the goal for all our shots with them is being real. These are real team members from their staff, and they are a real running group too. Shot at f1.8 because, you guessed it, that love for shallow focus. And that allowed for 1/4000th of a second shutter speed and ISO 100. If you wonder why her head is not distorted despite the 14mm focal length, she is pretty centered, reducing distortion to a minimum. Number 4 of my best images of 2022, a long exposure again. This was a really tricky one for several reasons. Photographing a waterfall with ND filters to get silky smooth water usually isn't all that difficult. This one, however, was shot in Plitvice in Croatia, an extremely crowded national park where masses of people walk on wooden runways over water. You feel the vibration long before they are even close to you. The second difficulty was that a part of the waterfall was in the sun and the rest was in the shade, creating a merely unusable image. So I decided I needed an HDR of 5 different exposures to make sure the waterfall in front is not overexposed and the shadows are not underexposed. In the end, I also removed a few items that I felt were distracting. Camera settings: Sony a7 IV, Sony 16-35mm f4 lens at 32mm, 5 exposures from 1 second to 15 seconds, aperture f5.6, ISO 100. And of course I had to use an ND filter. It must have been a 6 or a 10-stop filter. Now to the top 3 of my best images of 2022. Number 3 stands representative for the many macro shots I did this year. It is a very sad shot, and I talked a lot about that topic in my video about focus stacking. The death of bees. Somewhere around our house, a farmer is probably using pesticides, and we found quite a few dead bees during this summer. So let me repeat my call: stop using pesticides. I have many more of live insects that I really enjoyed photographing, and that is something I think I have improved a lot this year. Not only thanks to my new Olympus camera with a smaller Micro Four Thirds sensor that gives me a much higher depth of focus. If you wonder what this lens is, that's a surprise. Talking about depth of focus, this image is a focus stacked image to expand the depth of focus over the complete being. Shot with a Sony A7R II for the bigger resolution with a Sony 90mm macro lens. Shutter speed 0.3 seconds because I use continuous lights rather than flash, because I also recorded it for that focus stacking tutorial I mentioned. f11 and ISO 100. On a side note, another thing I plan for the next year is a macro photography course for the channel, so you might want to subscribe. It's getting really exciting, isn't it? Here is my second best image of 2022. The Milky Way, my lovely wife Birgit with a lamp in her hand, and the Dolomites. Let's get right into how we shot that. First and foremost, no, it's not a composition of multiple files. It's a single shot. Next, the camera settings. Sony A7 IV, Sony 14mm f1.8, so the same lens I used for the running photo. I love that lens and it is much more useful than you may think. 15 seconds exposure time and f1.8 aperture. And that awesome aperture gives me the option to shoot at ISO 800 and still get tack-sharp images of the night sky. All that in an ultralight lens that you can easily pack for hiking.
Okay, gear talk, sorry.
Now you may wonder, how did Birgit stand still for so long without the image getting blurry? And why isn't the lamp completely overexposed? Here's the trick. The lamp has a remote control. In one hand Birgit held the lamp and in the other hand she held the remote. So I pressed the shutter button again on my Bluetooth remote for the camera, then within 15 seconds exposure time Birgit powered on the light for about a second and then she quickly powered it off again. That way, once the lamp was dark again, the movement didn't really show in the image, in case she did actually move. I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know if you need a better explanation. Maybe I'll even create a Milky Way tutorial next year. Sorry for the portrait orientation, but the Milky Way asks for that. I'll post a YouTube Shorts video so that you can easier view it in portrait orientation. And now, drum roll! Time for my best image of 2022. Not sure if you like it as much as I do, another shot from the Dolomites. To me, this image stands for the amount of planning and austerity that goes into some of my images. Sleeping in the car at 5 degrees centigrade, getting up at 5 AM and hiking up the mountain in complete darkness, only to arrive at the place and see 30 other photographers have stayed overnight in a nearby hut. That could have been done easier. But what followed was just breathtaking. It was a perfect morning for that shot. The large trees were completely yellow, they only are like that for a week or so, and there was no wind and the water acted like a perfect mirror. The sun almost rose exactly at the tip of the mountain and created awesome rays. Again I used HDR, and since this was probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I even took 9 different exposures. Again, you guessed it, with my Bluetooth remote. So I didn't even have to take the hands out of my pocket. Camera info, Sony A7 IV, Sony 16-35mm f4 lens, 9 different exposures from 1/1250th of a second to 1/5 of a second, f16 for the starburst effect, and ISO 100. And now I want to ask you 2 questions. What are your goals for 2023? And is there something that I can do with this channel to help you achieve your goals? Let me know in the comments. A happy 2023 everyone. See you there if you subscribe.